Hi, I'm Katie Crane, and this is the Pilates Lounge. Hi everyone, my name's Katie Crane, the Pilates professional. Welcome to another episode of the Pilates Lounge podcast. Now, with this episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Tom McCook. To give you an idea, Tom McCook lives 8,000 miles away from me. And thanks to technology, we got to have an incredible conversation. But because of technology, some of that conversation was really crackly. And when my producer tried to edit the first 20 minutes of this episode, it was just so difficult for her to get rid of the scratchiness. Now, Tom and I worked really hard together to make this episode work, and we ended up changing microphones, and that did work. But you know, when you're like in conversation and you're already in the swing of it, I didn't want us to start our conversation again because Tom was just getting warmed up. And if you've never met Tom before, if you don't know who Tom is, even over this distance of 8,000 miles, Tom just exuded warmth and compassion. And I knew that everything that Tom was talking about was unique to our own conversation. So it just didn't feel right to stop and start again. So instead of you not hearing the first part of the conversation, I decided to do a little breakdown for you. So part of this episode is going to be me right here, right now, talking you through the first part of my conversation with Tom. And then the next part of the episode will be myself and Tom continuing the conversation that we had. So bear with me. Now, Tom McCook is owner of a Pilates studio called Center of Balance. He is in the beautiful part of the world, Mountain View, California. Now, for over 27 years, Tom has been an internationally recognized Master Pilates Teacher. He is a Franklin Method Educator and a Somatic Coach certified. Now, I love talking to people who are so dedicated to the profession that they have chosen. And during our discussion, it was very evident that Tom's mission is to improve people's lives through movement and in particular to inspire healthy aging. So let me get into what we first spoke about so that you can get a good understanding of who Tom is and just what it is that I love so much about talking to Tom. So like I said, he lives on the outside of San Francisco with his wife and business partner, Karen Timor. Tom's journey into the world of Pilates and movement practice is truly as inspiring as it is educational. Tom grew up in a large, active family with 8 brothers and 3 sisters, and his early life was really filled with physical activity, which is quite common for Pilates instructors. And then that physical activity eventually led him into fitness training during the 1980s. I didn't ask for any evidence, but I did wonder whether or not he was into the Lycra or into the fluoro kind of stuff, or if he even had leg warmers. Goodness me, the imagination just bubbles. So Tom managed Gold's Gym. You probably heard of Gold's Gym while attending school, where his interest in how people exercise began to take shape. Because of Tom working at the gym, he was able to see firsthand how people were communicating with each other and the types of service that that were available. And Tom decided to put his hat in the ring, and he felt like he could probably have a pretty good chance of launching his own training business and doing well. So he did so in 1986. I know some of you, or many of you, are probably born around that age. Now, Tom has worked in his own practice ever since then. And curiously, Tom hasn't just taught Pilates. He was led to Shiatsu, which is actually a form of Japanese bodywork. And Tom said that this was a really pivotal moment in his career because he went to a Shiatsu demonstration and he was picked out of the crowd to be the body to experience Shiatsu. And he said that if he hadn't actually experienced the Shiatsu for himself on his own body, then he probably would never have become a practitioner because he simply would not have believed that what he felt having had the practice done on him was even possible. But he said that he was so blown away by the experience of having Shiatsu performed on him that he became a practitioner as well. So this experience, he said, was really just the beginning of a long, dedicated path in bodywork and somatic education, which, as he explained, is really about understanding the body in its wholeness, aligning physical health with personal purpose. Tom's work beautifully blends the mind-body movement practice with somatic education, helping people not become just more fit, but understanding and dignifying their own life's journey. Tom really encourages us to appreciate our body's natural wisdom, moving away from the mindset of fixing something and towards one of curiosity and self-inquiry. And really, this is a philosophy that has resonated deeply with many, especially those in the second half of life, as Tom candidly let me know he's now 62 years old and he reflects on the importance of moving well and feeling good rather than just focusing on strength and fitness. And I don't know if you remember, but when I spoke to Madeline Black, and if you haven't listened to that episode, I definitely encourage you to go back and listen to the episode with Madeline Black, because she very much said the same. These instructors or these educators who have now been teaching movement for some of our lifetimes, they often have very similar messages as they go deeper and more expansive into the work. And we don't need to be always hurting our body to perform well. Sometimes, and a lot of the time, it's about listening to what our body needs and reflecting on the importance of moving well and feeling good, just like Tom said. In this conversation, Tom candidly shares his journey, insights and experiences from his very early days of bodywork right through to his extensive training in somatic practices to work with elite athletes, including Olympians. Now, Tom was worked with the Olympic swim team during the 2000 Olympics in Australia, and as the dry land coach for the Stanford women's swim team, a role that connected him with elite athletes like Jenny Thompson, Misty Hyman. Tom applied this unique approach to movement and bodywork to help these athletes achieve their peak performance. His work was instrumental in Misty Hyman's stunning victory in the 200-meter butterfly, where she swam 4 seconds faster in the finals than what she had done in the Olympic trials. And this is virtually unheard of as far as improvement at that level of competition. Tom said that what he found most intriguing about working with elite athletes was how their physical imbalances were often more visible than in the general population. And I suppose when you're working with these bodies who are performing at such an elite level, they have these perfectly chiseled bodies, then it's like we're looking at the most perfect painting that you've ever seen, and you can just see some of those unique parts of the images that don't quite look right. I guess it would be the same when you're working with athletes. It's very easy to see where these imbalances are. And he also said that partly is because the nature of their training is so repetitive, And this experience that he had only deepened his appreciation for the subtle intricacies of the human body and really reinforced the importance of mindful, efficient movement, which I just love that. I love how when we speak to other people's Pilates journey, people come up with their own unique individual stories of how Pilates has molded their experience and their life and their career. But a lot of the time we are seeing a lot of the same things with very, very different people. Now, Tom's experience, he said, with Olympians also really revealed a surprising insight. He said specifically that many coaches, despite their expertise in motivation and strategy, they often lack a deep understanding of the body mechanics. Well, this was Tom's experience in any case, and he said that the gap further highlighted the value of Tom's work in helping athletes and all of us tap into our body's natural wisdom and move with greater awareness and efficiency. And I think we're probably seeing this more now. I mean, so this was back in the year 2000. A lot of people had never even heard of Pilates. It wasn't like today where there is now a Pilates studio on every single corner, if not two studios on one corner. Back in the 2000s and late 1990s, you were lucky to find a Pilates studio. So the work that Tom was doing was pretty unheard of as far as working with elite athletes. Now we see a lot of the football teams, a lot of the netball teams, a lot of physical performers are utilizing Pilates for this exact reason. But Tom saw this so long ago. I just think that it's fascinating. So as we dive into Tom's conversation, we're going to explore more of Tom's journey, his philosophy on movement, and how his teachings can really inspire all of us to live healthier, more fulfilling lives. So whether you're a Pilates professional, a movement enthusiast, or somebody who is simply curious about that profound connection between mind and body, this episode is packed with insights that you do not want to miss. So I'm going to hand over the show now to continue the conversation that I had with the beautiful, gracious, and highly intelligent Tom McCook. I really hope that you do enjoy this incredible journey that we had together. So when you're working with like an athlete, I mean, most of the people that come into my studio, they're like in their 40s to 80s, and we're literally just working on functional movement, getting them as comfortable as possible and, just thinking of how they can improve their living in just their daily tasks. But this is a totally different kettle of fish when you're working with an athlete. I mean, I'm sure that, they also benefit from all of the daily living stuff, but how are you approaching them? I mean, are you still approaching them in the way that we normally do Pilates? I mean, will you just do the work and the magic happens, or are you being really specific to, whatever sport they're playing and working with those movements?
I think a combination of both. I think a combination of a couple things. One is what brought them in to see me in the first place, like getting clear on what is it they want to improve. Are they dealing with recovering from an injury or a nagging condition? Having them help me understand what they do in their sport. I want to be able to see what they do, because a lot of the information for me and for you, if you're a person who studies movement, is going to be revealed by watching them do what they do. So I would always go out and watch them and see them perform instead of just talking about it, because if you don't see it and you don't have an understanding of their sport, you're a little bit lacking in terms of being able to really help them and to be able to give them skillful insight how to make those little changes that'll improve not just their performance but make them less injury prone. Because anybody that, swimming's great, but it's a whole different animal to race when you're swimming. To swim as fast and as hard as you can, you're just as injury prone as the person who's a runner, because you're doing all this repetitive stress, and the water is actually pretty hard when you're trying to power through it hard. You went from a casual swim to becoming a motorboat. So it's not the same. So their mechanics become more critical. Strengthening the right support muscles becomes really critical. And also learning to train them in a way where you expose where they break down. Like, so if you have a racer who does like 100-meter backstroke or freestyle or butterfly, whatever, to really expose where in that race do they tend to lose their form. And then use some part of your training to amplify that weakness, to really hold them in a position for maybe the length of time that would be their race, where they look fine for the first 30 seconds, and then you start to see it. It starts to get exposed, and then start building strength into those weaknesses where they can hold their form. Like one of the things with Natalie Coughlin, which was so amazing, if you watch her shoot, she held the world record in the 100 backstroke. She was the first woman to go over under a minute. She held it for 5 years. She held that record. But what she did is she swam, if you watched her swim, she was doing 1 stroke to everybody else's 1.5. So what that tells you is she was able to use energy and plane through the water better because she didn't fractionate her energy by breaking in particular parts of her body, usually the lower back or the hips. And so her movement efficiency was really great, but it's also harder to hold because you got to be in better condition to do that. So our goal was to get her to hold it longer. so that, you don't know when you go to work with somebody, all this gets exposed over time, and I worked with them for many years. But then also just helping them recover better, helping them recover and put a value on recovery, put a value on better form over just a lot of reps. That's a progression for an athlete too, because they've all been conditioned for the most part. They need to get really strong. That can be presented to them in a very general, gross way. And if you bring in the principle of specificity, which means you get good at exactly what you do, it doesn't necessarily translate to something else. So that's an important principle to discuss with your athletes is what we're doing helping you get better or not? Because a lot of times when athletes train and they start doing a lot of weight training, their body can look more muscular and they can really like that. They like to look muscular, we all do, but doesn't always translate into moving better.
Right, so we're thinking like efficiency, so would you say that, as a Pilates teacher, then you're really introducing the concepts of endurance and efficient movement, and I guess like that is that whole dynamic stability. So say, as a swimmer, like you say, trying to think of being a torpedo through the water and not allowing any part of your body to fail. But I imagine as a swimmer there also has to be, you don't want rigidity either, do you? Like a fish is not rigid, right? So it's that dynamic strength, isn't it?
It is. You want that fluid strength where you're connecting your limbs to the middle of your body, where you're less distal, meaning you're less overextended, you're more connected while you're reaching to the middle of your body, so your limbs are connected to each other. And the other thing is, if you can do that well, you feel more. You're more sensual with the water. You're in a relationship to the water instead of fighting the water. And the ones that do it well are really in that relationship with the water. And I think it's the same in the Pilates studio. If you're helping people be in relationship with the equipment, where they can feel it to turn their body on and move better and have appropriate tone and position, where they're still getting a really solid workout, but it's more of it's a dance with the equipment, just like an athlete is moving with the water or a runner who runs well. And it's interesting when you watch people who are really good at something, it's always inspiring to see because it's very inviting to watch. And that's kind of a good sign when somebody's moving in a way that, wow, I'd like to do that. It's very inspiring to see that when somebody moves well. And I always hold that in mind for the athletes that I work with, that they can get a little bit better if they hold that quality of grace and like economy of effort. And then we can expose what needs to be strengthened. Because, you can do core work and get away with it with a lot of neck and shoulder tension. But if you let go of the shoulder and neck tension, what might get exposed is you weren't using your core as much as you needed to. And you weren't able to breathe as well as you'd like to be able to breathe while you're doing the exercise. So the compensation tension patterns can override what's weak. And you're burning a lot of unnecessary energy. So those are all really nice things that you can kind of expose with your athletes to help them enjoy their movement better, enjoy their training better, and get more out of it. And that's kind of what all my approach has always been is, one, every week when I saw them, ask them what they want to improve, what's going well, what are you struggling with? And then I would make my own notes of, I wouldn't hit them in the head with what they were weak at, but I would always share with them what I think they could do better and what would be good for us to work on. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not that much different than the everyday population. It's just a little more intentional on an outcome.
Right.
Where you're working towards a goal, which actually, from a teaching perspective, makes it a little clearer. You're working towards something, so they're coming in motivated, which is actually really nice to work with. Like a lot of times, if our clients come in that are not athletes and they're not that fit, and their body hurts, it can be harder to get them to do the amount of work that they need to do. Mm-hmm. So that's really like, how do we motivate those people? And I think even with an athlete, I've always trained them with fundamental movements before I get them into the full Pilates exercises. So you're developing a vocabulary for movement. So they understand, okay, how do I position my pelvis? How does my hip joint move well? How is my shoulder designed to move? I always give them those lessons so they can be inside the exercise before we do anything super hard. And then what makes it hard is doing it well, as you know.
Just a quick little interruption to say a big thank you to listening to the Pilates Lounge podcast. This podcast is all about sharing our love of movement and Pilates with as many people as possible. So if you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to review us so that we can get the word out there. Also, if you haven't joined us on the Pilates Muse newsletter, it's a bi-weekly newsletter that shares a whole load of information with you. And we also have virtual online education programs. So if you're looking to get inspired and grow even more as a Pilates professional, check us out, www.thepilatesprofessional.com.au. Back to the show. Right. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? So I guess just because somebody, an athlete, might be really good at running or swimming, it doesn't mean that they really understand. They might understand the technicality of the movements that they're doing all the time, but they don't necessarily understand or have an awareness of those really basic foundational body shapes.
It's completely true. I thought they would. They would know things that the general public didn't know. They don't. It's just like a Pilates teacher. You can be a good mover naturally, but you might not know where your hip joints are if somebody tells you to put your fingers on them, or how the joints are oriented in your spine. So you're going to go put your attention on moving your spine in the way that it was designed, as opposed to forcing ranges of motion under some notion of, I need to be more flexible. It's more just useful information so they can be more skillful with themselves and not be aggressive and overly forceful. And I think also letting them know that rest is really important. And I would always, if they came in and they were fried and I had an idea, I already had an agenda of what I wanted to do with them, but I could tell that they were kind of burnt out, we would just do a restorative session because I didn't want to add insult to injury. And they were good with that. I think they learned that, if they don't recover, it's not just physical, it's mental that's actually suffering too. So they get a little overdrained and then it's harder to manage what they got coming.
Mm. I imagine that must be really difficult for somebody like at an Olympic level to manage. I mean, sometimes, who doesn't love watching these magnificent bodies, be the fastest and the strongest in the world? But sometimes I almost think I'm watching like the Hunger Games, does anybody actually... they're running for a corporation, right? How much is really put into that self-care, the recovery, because all anybody else cares is that they're just going to win that one race. That's all they're there for.
It's so true. And I think athletics as a whole have gotten better and better over the years, but in general, especially in sports like gymnastics, swimming, there's a high propensity for overtraining. And the ones that survive are the ones that already have pretty bulletproof bodies. But a lot of them break. A lot of athletes break and you don't hear about them. You only hear about the ones that made it to the events. So my encouragement to the coaching and also to the athletes was to value listening to their body and that they're in charge. Sure, they have to follow some protocols, but I would always say, listen, when we work together, you're in charge. I'm not inside your nervous system, you are. And let's be in a relationship to serve you better so you can listen to your body better and get the best results in our time together. Because everybody's different. Some athletes are much more neurally sensitive and they need a lot more time to recover. Others need more volume, and they can take it all. So you don't know who you're going to deal with until you work with them. We're not all built the same, in that regard anyway.
And when you're working with athletes or, with sports people, do you think are you looking to continually imitate the movement that they're having to perform, or are you focusing a lot more on cross-training so that then they are able to perform that movement on stage?
I think a combination of both. Like, one of the things for a swimmer is they're more of an aquatic animal, so they're planing in the water. So it's actually a lot of times what you'll find with swimmers, if they don't cross-train, they're uncoordinated on the land. So it's important for them to do stuff in gravity, upright, standing exercises where they work on balance, foot to hip relationships, so they can get strong in their feet and their hips and their spine in an upright posture position. And that, I think it does translate into swimming better because it makes their whole structure stronger. So a combination of both, but I think just hitting all the movement planes where you expose the weak link and where the imbalances are. A lot of times in swimmers, their shoulders tend to be up and forward from all of the repetitive motion. So getting them into their mid-back, opening their chest, extending their spine, especially their thoracic spine, and strengthening their hip extensors is really helpful for them. So I think it's more, the cross-training is helpful, but again, it all comes down to the form. Can you have them do it with good form and help them strengthen all the support muscles really well, and have fun? They've got a lot on their plate. They do a lot, so make it fun. Don't just go after the weak link as a starting point. Let them build into it, and that seems to be really helpful for the stuff that we did. And I would always vary it. I would use all the Pilates equipment. I would give them, when I first started working with athletes, I always gave them way too much homework, and they wouldn't do any of it. So I learned to back it down and go, okay, what would be the 2 or 3 things that I could give them that are really relevant, that they would be successful with following through on? And that seemed to work a whole lot better. Because I could tell the minute I saw them when they came in if they did their homework or not before they even said anything. I mean, it's all visible. So that was helpful. So if they came in and they knew they did it, their mood was completely different. They were looking more for affirmation from me, that they could share that with me instead of, oh shit, I didn't do my homework, So that was really helpful. And that's a learning curve. More is definitely not better. Like, consistency over time is what makes us all improve, and acknowledging the minor progresses that are made along the way. And keep highlighting what they're doing well instead of being overly critical. I think that goes for not just athletes, for all our clients, because I think just in general as humans, our brain is designed to look for what's wrong and where the threat is. And we have to develop more of that part of ourself that acknowledges what's good, and even cultivate the ability to have more language instead of just the word good. Like, I feel inspired, I feel fluid, I feel open, I feel gratitude. All those things have to be amplified. I think that's a great thing we can do as teachers too. We can encourage that and get people to recognize more and more how far they've come, especially if they've come to you and they've been in pain for a while, and now they're coming out of that, they're in less pain. Even if they're still in a little bit of pain, acknowledge that they've made progress. That's super important. We need that inspiration to really have reflection that way. So I think that's, for me, is, what's a better relationship than to help people enjoy their life, I don't think it gets better than that.
Yeah, hands down. I feel like it's scary for people to sit inside themselves and really consider how they may be feeling, because what if I fail? What if what I'm feeling isn't right? What if, or even if I am feeling better to what I was, what if this isn't forever? I think there's so much fear. And part of that is that, we're body people, right? We're movement people. So we spend a lot of time doing those things, and potentially it comes natural to us. But for the most part, for most people, that's a very foreign and potentially scary thing to be doing.
It really is. And I think that I found that's really useful is to get people to realize that moving their body changes their mood. Like, say you're in an anxious state, you wake up a lot of time. Like, for me personally, if I was going to experience anxiety or worry, it would usually be in the morning. Like when I wake up, I'm all the litany of concerns about my studio or my life or my in-laws or my mother-in-law, all this stuff would be in the morning. But I've learned that if I just take 5 or 10 minutes or 15 minutes to get my body and move, nothing changed in the outside world, but my perspective changed because now I'm grounded in my body. And then I can remember who I am and remember why I'm here. And that I'm here to actually be in service and help others and actually be present to my life. And that's the only working unit that we have is right now. So we have to see that getting in our body and getting present is a practice in itself. And it's really the only place that we can be effective with cultivating our own fulfillment and helping each other. And I think that's something we need to keep teaching our clients too. Give them 1 or 2 exercises that they've done with you. Say, listen, if they've shared that they experience stress, because think of what is stress. Stress is really, a nice definition one of my coaches told me was stress is really the physical interpretation of threat. So if I'm stressed, I'm actually inside of threat. So how do I shift? I need to bring my attention back to where I am and also make it dignify how I'm doing. I'm feeling anxious right now. I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling, whatever it is. There's no bad feelings, there's just our interpretation that amplifies it. So I think that's another piece of it. It's like your body and movement can help you be a little more facile with your feelings and include them all. We really need to do that. I think that's another avenue in the Pilates world that's, I think more and more teachers are using it as a way to help people cultivate better self-knowing and dignity, and I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like more and more people are looking for that, and I feel like, more and more people are suffering from anxiety and being so stressed that, I know in our studio, I think we've been operating for nearly 20 years and it used to be a lot of physical stuff, but now people are coming because they feel stressed out and anxious, they're not sleeping. And then, all of that starts to change just by coming in and doing Pilates, but also coming in and being a part of a community where they feel valued and where they feel like people actually care. I definitely recognize that in a Pilates studio, which is a very different atmosphere to, a gym, we have a quiet space, just it embodies that caring, nurturing experience. More and more people are definitely looking for that.
It's so true. Yeah, we're think of like in our early part of our adulthood in general, we strive and we're looking for significance, and then I think and there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of one of our human needs. But I think as we, maybe even younger for some now, connection becomes just as important, or maybe more important. Connecting and reflection with others, and I think that's a beautiful thing that we can recognize. Is people don't need to be told what to do; they just need to be together, and movement is a form of therapy all on its own, and that's a beautiful thing. In our studio, our center of balance we've had since 1997. One of the best things that I did is from the very beginning of my studio is in the beginning for the first 15 years, every Tuesday and Thursday from 3 to 5 o'clock was staff workout time. There's no clients allowed in the studio. So all the staff would work out together twice a week for 15 years. And we still do it once a week now, every week for the last 27 years. And I think it was probably the best move I made. It created a culture in our studio where people could share and say, I don't know, what do you think? But also put a value on, if you're going to teach movement, you have to practice it. And that's a big deal. I think that tends to be missing a little bit in our teaching world now, I find, because I teach a lot of workshops. I always ask the students, how many of you bought into the story that you're too busy to do your own practice? And half the room a lot of times will raise their hand. And I said, I'm not sure why you're here if you're not going to do your practice, because you're not going to learn what I'm about to teach you if you don't practice it. So that's, I think,
Yeah, it's so true. And it's such a difficult position to be in, isn't it? Because I feel like a lot of us go into this industry because we have a sense of wanting to serve other people, and and movement makes sense to us, and then we get stuck in that serving other people. But like you say, I mean, you can't continue to expand and know yourself to be able to serve without your self practice. And I think as a studio, Yeah, we're exactly the same. We're like every Wednesday. This is when we get together. Sometimes we'll watch something together online. Sometimes we'll just talk about different clients and play around with different concepts. But you have to, and it's definitely something that is it's the very last thing I say to every single student that comes through our doors doing their teacher training. Now, the most important thing for you to continue is your self practice.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, it's so critical. And it's really like what you were saying about like the anxiety and stress in the world. That's where it goes away. Like we have to be practicing something to build our own resilience in our presence, especially in a world that has more uncertainty now than maybe ever. It's so critical that we have, we're both blessed in that way that we found something that actually is the elixir for imbalances that can happen both mentally and physically, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Hey, can we touch a little bit on Pilates for men? Traditionally Pilates has been, very, very female centric, but, I know that over the years, we always say in our studio, intelligent men do Pilates. When a guy comes in, they say, do men come here? So can you talk a little bit about your own experience as a man who practices Pilates, and when you serve other men in the community, how is it different? I feel like quite often my teaching, the way that I explain things has to change, but for a long time I was always questioning, are the spring settings the same, which often they are, right? But what do you feel like the differences are?
I'd say, in general, if you look in most studios, like luckily for me, I have two other men my age that teach in my studio. We have three guys that teach in my studio, which is pretty unique for Pilates. But I think in general, men don't gravitate towards Pilates because they don't like to be seen doing things they don't think they're going to be good at. So they're a little more self-critical. So I think you have to, when guys come into your studio, you have to make it approachable for them and ask, like, what are they into in their life? What do they like to do physically? Like tie it to what they want to improve, whether it's riding a bike or playing tennis or whatever. Or say, I just want to feel better. So, have them tell you what they want to improve. And then let your answer come out of that, of how this work can help them, instead of believing that you already know what they need. To really connect with them by asking them personally, what would you like to improve, And then you might expose, any fears they have about their body or any injuries, I don't want to do this or that. And say that's all fine, don't force them into doing things that they don't want to do, but also give them a good movement experience their first session. Give them a full body movement experience their first session that's not too subtle as a starting point. Have them do getting on the reformer is a great thing. Have them do the footwork, the arm work. Get them to move and give them a couple corrections that show them the benefit of doing it well. And really highlight that for them. So this isn't about doing a ton of repetitions. This is about having your body function well. And most guys will get the logic of that. They'll say, wow, okay. Your body's designed to be efficient and move well. And that's the way I've always approached them. From a spring perspective, it's not really that much different. I think it's more based on their body weight and how they can perform the exercise with good form. That's the way I've always approached it. But I always tie it to what they want to, what would they like to improve? Similar to an athlete. But I think that's, guys like to be, I don't know if it's, men and women are really not that different in a lot of ways. But for when I'm speaking to a guy, I keep it very base level. Say, listen, what do you want to get better at? Is there any injuries that you have that I should know about? And they'll say, well, I got this thing going on my lower back. And I'll say, well, tell me more about that, because I think we need to make sure that what we're doing is going to be in support of that feeling better, not aggravating it. So then they feel like I'm really paying attention to them and what their needs are. And I think if you can connect that way and then give them a really good movement experience, you're much more likely to have them return, instead of already determining and without asking those questions what you think they need. The other thing that I use a lot too is I use a movement assessment. I use the functional movement screen by Gray Cook, but I've modified it at our studio to make it a little more approachable. So with men in particular, I might do the traditional functional movement screen, but a lot of times I'll modify it if I can tell that they're not as conditioned, they're not an athlete from their past. So I'll make the movements a little more approachable. But those are really useful too, because a lot of times giving somebody an assessment builds your value. And you're not going to know. Say you have a guy who's an office worker that comes in and he sits all day, and then you just have him lie on the mat and breathe. That's not actually going to expose. It's not going to tell you what's going on with him. So you can have him do these functional movement screens around lunging, squatting, shoulder mechanics, and a lot that gets exposed that you can't see when they're just standing there. And those are really good pieces of information. And then I would give them, in their first session, I might give them one or two corrective exercises based on what we found in the screen as their homework. And that's what they go home with, and then I ask them if they would like to schedule another session. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be a very successful approach to do it that way.
Yeah,
because then they feel like I tapped into something with them right away.
Yeah, I see that as well. Like you say, you could send a woman over to the mat and tell her just to breathe and, and allow for your rib cage to expand into the mat and all those flowery things. With our men, they're like, no, I just need to know what I need to do. They need logic, they need mechanical, they need, everything needs to have a purpose. And it's not, don't flower it up. I don't bother so much about using imagery. Like, I love all of the Franklin method imagery, but I don't tend to use that as much with men. They just need to know, where is their knee, where is their foot, and why are we doing it?
Right. Same. And if I teach them the Franklin method in our first session, it'll be more anatomical, and I'll give them self-touching cues on where to hinge and how to feel their body so they can improve their mechanics pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be really helpful too. And don't make it too technical, mm-hmm. especially in the beginning. I mean, you can lead them into subtlety as you develop the relationship, but you want, as you know, if somebody doesn't come in for at least 5 sessions, you didn't really give them an opportunity to experience the work fully yet. Really more like 10 sessions, but 5 sessions minimal. And if you can't get them over the threshold of committing to that, it's kind of difficult to get them to really value the work. So you got to really tie it into really quickly. What are they interested in? Why did they come in the first place? And go after that right away. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That would be my vote, my strategy. Mm-hmm. And obviously, and then you can also, if they have a particular condition that you've worked with and you've been successful, you can share that with them too. I've worked on this before, and this has been really helpful for these people. Let's try it out, see how it goes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And those are all, have them do an intake. I'm sure, you probably do intake forms too. But a lot of times people don't put on the intake form things that would have been good to be on the intake form. We had a woman come in who wanted to do groups with us, and she was in a group with one of my teachers. She was about to do a roll down, and her spine doesn't move. She didn't let the teacher know that she had Carrington rods in her back, so her back was fused. Would have been a good information to put on her intake form. So you never know, but usually it gets exposed if you're willing to ask the right questions.
Yeah, I feel like with the intake form, we do them as well. People only put on there what is relevant to them today. Not, if you've had those Carrington rods in your back, for the last 20 years, it's no longer relevant. You live with that, If you're missing that leg and that's been 20 years of amputation, then you don't put that on the form. It's so fascinating, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
In terms of, I love the mat. I love the Pilates mat work, especially for men. I might give them, if I teach them a full session, I would always spend at least 10 minutes on the mat of teaching them the basics of good positioning and form, and how that, without them knowing in the beginning, how that ties into all the other exercises. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The footwork and all of the stuff you do on the reformer can be connected to what you do on the mat. And that helps them with better alignment and positioning and all those things that are, they're safe but also really effective.
Yeah, that's all great information, Tom, because like I said, I know that, there's a lot of, female-only Pilates studios where people don't even have male instructors. We've got what we call our token male instructor. He's been with us for about 8 years, and it's great. I love listening to the way that he teaches, because it is quite different. I pick up a lot of cues from how he teaches, and it's, it's just very practical, isn't it? The way that I feel like there must be, like, the way that men are built, it's very tunnel vision, whereas women are much broader in the way that we tend to see things from the bigger perspective. You guys are really good at seeing detail, but that means that they just need, just very specific, this is what you need to do, go do it, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that, like, from the Franklin perspective, the Franklin method, what I learned is you can't give people too many cues in a time. One or two cues is all anybody can really take in at any one moment. So you got to really back it down. Like, especially as a beginning teacher, we can work too hard by rattling off way too many cues, and the person isn't digesting it. Mm-hmm. It has to be like specific, and then if you're going to give an anatomical cue, make sure you gave them an understanding of that part of their body first. Otherwise, it just creates confusion, and you can see the deer in headlights look where they just went into a little bit of a delay. Like if someone says, turn on your core, that's kind of a general term where you don't really know what that means. People might think, tighten your middle. I mean, that it can work, but it's pretty general and not very specific. Mm-hmm. So that's the way I think men respond better, if you give them a little bit of information that's relevant and then guide them into the exercise with the understanding of what the benefit is going to be. Mm-hmm. Instead of, I need to do whatever because the teacher knows better. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And probably people in general, I think, like it's so easy just to get, caught in word salad, or even using too many anatomical terms and assuming that people know, I remember when I first started teaching, for 2 years, I taught this lady scooter, and I kept saying, you feel that in your glutes and hamstrings. And she kept saying, yep, for 2 years. And then one day I asked her that, glutes and hamstrings, and she said, hamstrings, yeah, and she patted the front of her leg. I was like, oh, blimey. But that was my fault. I assumed that she knew what her hamstrings were. Like, why would she? She doesn't, she's not a body person. So now I'm like, the back of your leg. Yeah, the front of your leg.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It's true. Like, that's why self-touch is also a really useful thing. Have people touch their own body parts. Mm-hmm. Can you feel that? Can you feel when it turns on? Do you notice where that, all of that is, then you're connecting their brain to the body parts so much quicker. Mm-hmm. Opposed to, like, the names almost don't matter. It's more, can they take their awareness there and, quickly and then repetitively. Mm-hmm. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. Now, Tom, before we wrap up, I've got a big question for you, which I know everybody always struggles with this question, which is why I ask it. If you could, you've been working with bodies for a long, long time. Your own introduction to working with bodies is quite unique. If you could have a conversation with your younger self, what sort of message would you want to tell yourself now that you know everything that you do?
Well, a couple things. I would tell myself to take care of yourself. And actually, and the way you want to do that is really, like in my earlier life, I used to lift a lot of heavy weights, and I think younger men in particular, I have a lot of compassion for, because, and women too, but I think we need to have ways to burn a lot of energy. And for me, weight training was probably a better choice than going and doing drugs or getting in trouble. So we got to have some ways to burn energy that actually, and then hopefully we can find ways to burning energy that's healthy. And I think for me, I would tell my younger self to really learn to understand my body well and use my own body weight more. Like, I wish I got into Pilates even younger. I got into it when I was 30, but I wish I got into it even younger, because I think my body would have felt better. Because I played competitive sports. I played football and hockey. I played a lot of contact sports that Pilates and body work helped me heal a lot of the injuries that I suffered in those sports. But I would tell them, learn about your body, because you'll learn to appreciate it more, and learn to listen to it. Learn to listen to your body, and learn to breathe well and meditate. I'm a long-term meditator. I've been meditating for 35 years, and I think that's been a great gift too, to learn how to be still, learn how to say thank you, and appreciate those that have come before you. Appreciate all your mentors. Have gratitude. Be thankful for everybody that's taught you something in your life. I think that's one of my teachers has said something to me that really stood out to me, is that wisdom isn't learned, it's shared. Mm-hmm. And sharing my wisdom now comes through our conversation we're having, and with others that can share their wisdom. And we all have wisdom to share. And I think that's a big one. A big one is to not necessarily seek happiness, but seek ways to be grateful. Because when you're grateful, you're happy.
Mm-hmm.
You still might have challenges in front of you, but you approach them from a different place. And I have tremendous gratitude for Joe Pilates and the people that have held on to that torch and shared it in the world, and for Eric Franklin, for people that have put out things that have been difficult that people didn't know about, that you had to stand up in front of people and share something that no one had a clue what you were talking about. It requires a lot of courage, and I have tremendous gratitude for people that have been willing to do that. So I think that would be my message to my younger self, is to really acknowledge your teachers and help everyone else do the same, and share with others what you found valuable. Share with people. Don't be afraid to share what you found valuable with those close to you and your colleagues. That's kind of a good way to go too, because I think the truth is, like for you and I, you only get better at something by sharing it. You don't get better at it by keeping it to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Right, it's so true, isn't it? And absolutely agree with everything that you've just said. I'm also a long-term meditator, and I think that even just the practice of meditation, it brings gratitude into your life anyway, doesn't it? Because you make time for that. But doing this podcast has been such a wonderful way for people to share, their knowledge and their passion. And I know that it's bringing a lot of people together. I feel like that's, it doesn't matter how long you've been in this industry for, if we keep sharing whatever it is that we have experienced, observed, what we're learning, then we can only serve more people, by doing that.
It's so true. And I'm grateful for you that you're doing it and for inviting me to be in this space with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom, for joining us. Now, for our listeners, where can we find you? I will pop it all in the show notes for our listeners. Mm-hmm. But where's the best place to find you?
Well, our studio Center of Balance is in Mountain View, California, which is in the Bay Area, which is about 40 minutes south of San Francisco. We're right in the heart of Googleville in Silicon Valley. We have a beautiful studio. We have a 5,000 square foot studio, and that's a place you can also find me. But you can also find me online. I have classes online. If you go to centerofbalance.com, you can, if you're an experienced teacher and you want to jump into any of my equipment classes, you can do that with me. But I also have some online mat classes that I'll be back teaching in the fall. I'm taking the month of August off. I'm recovering from an injury from a fall that I had in my shoulder, so I'm doing my own rehab right now, which feels good. It's good to have a little time off just to have some regenerative time. But I'll be back in the studio then, and if anybody has, they want to ask me any questions personally, they can just shoot me a message at tom@centerofbalance.com too. I'm happy to interact with your listeners.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Tom McCook, for joining us today. My name's Katie Crane, the Pilates professional, and you're listening to the Pilates Lounge podcast.
Thank you, Katie.